Welcome to the Daily Fantasy Flex podcast, the NBA edition. It is great to be back on this Friday slate. We have 8 games, a bunch of interesting ones, actually. We had our first podcast on Monday and had some good feedback, good reception, so we appreciate that as always. We're going to do these as much as possible, looking like maybe twice a week at this point, but definitely want to do these as much as possible because they're a lot of fun, and you guys seem to enjoy them. So we're back for this Friday slate. And as usual, I'm joined by my dudes, Justin and Jay. Fellas, what's happening? Jay, what's going on, dude?
Not much. Excited for this 8-game slate like you are. I think it sets up to be an interesting one. I know off air we talked about some prop bets on this pod, so I'm excited to get into those.
Yeah, Justin, what's going on, man?
Yeah, quite different this year doing these podcasts in the morning. I feel like the tables have turned. Last year we got a lot of zombie Bryan, and this year we're setting up for a lot of zombie Justin here. So working on 3 hours sleep here, but excited to get into the slate.
Oh, how the tables have turned. That's right. Yeah, so we're gonna keep the same sort of flow on the show as we did or not last week, on Monday. So we're gonna hit on injuries and news real quick, and then we're going to break down just 2 of the more interesting games. Sometimes they'll be the 2 highest total games. Sometimes they'll just be the most fantasy-friendly games, maybe just the most interesting ones for us in tournaments or cash. And then we'll go through the positions and talk, chalk and potential leverage plays, any other guys that are interesting. So we'll keep that same flow. I think it worked well. One piece of feedback that we did get was that sometimes we use nicknames too much. So apologies for that one. We'll try to use players' full names as much as possible instead of nicknames. So Damian Lillard instead of Dame.
I can't do that one.
We'll do our best. Damian. All right, Jay, can you start us off with the injury news and notes for today?
Yeah, we got there's quite a few actually, some questionables that'll definitely come into play. But starting off, we got Jahlil Okafor active, but he's not planning on playing, just for emergency purposes only. So it's kind of reverse of last game. Then we got Joel Embiid is playing, top 5 NBA player in the league. So don't forget that he's playing tonight. For Washington, we got Bradley Beal, questionable with right hamstring tightness. John Wall is also questionable. He's going to rest on back-to-backs. We don't know if it's tonight or tomorrow night yet. Obviously, follow the feed and we'll keep you posted. Jonas Valanciunas is questionable with left knee contusion. Things weren't looking great for him last time, so I wouldn't be too surprised if he sat out tonight again. Roy Hibbert is actually back after missing a stretch of games with that sore right knee, so we can expect him in the starting lineup, even though he could be pretty limited in his first game back. The surprise of the day is Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, after being probable, is now ruled out with a strained lower back. No word on the starter yet, but it could potentially be your man, Frank Kaminsky. We could see out there. George Hill, questionable once again with that sprained right thumb. Al Horford is doubtful again with the concussion. Jay Crowder is still sidelined with that sprained left ankle that's led to Boston's defense collapsing. Tony Parker is questionable with that right knee soreness. And then Al-Farouq Aminu is ruled out again with the strained left calf.
All right, got that, guys? Just every player in the NBA is questionable, apparently. So, that was a lot of stuff, but definitely follow FantasyLabs NBA for injury updates, news updates, and you can also just go to the news page on the site if you want to look up any player, just follow along. So, a bunch of injury news. It feels like it's been pretty brutal lately. I got victimized by the Dragic Gary Harris last night. Who was it the night before? Oh, Bryan. Yeah, then the night before, I think, was the weird Phoenix stuff with Len. Gasol was last week. I mean, it feels like it's been fairly brutal with just these injuries or whatever.
Well, not only injuries, but I think there's been a disproportionate amount of blowouts to start the year, and that's really messed things up too, because I'm targeting these games where friendly matchups on paper where I expect players to really dominate in their matchup, and it's turning out that they're only playing like 28 minutes, 26 minutes because these games are getting out of hand. I haven't looked it up yet, but doing minutes every night, and I kind of go through and look at the margin of victories for every game to kind of see if it was legit or if it was too low due to blowout. I've been seeing a lot of blowouts just in general, and last night, was an example. I liked that Denver game. I know that line was kind of sneaky at 6.5 all day. So I was kind of on Denver with Moutier. I like that spot against kind of a gimpy Steph Curry.
Yeah.
And that game just turn out to be a total blowout. And love Chris Paul against the Blazers, and I think it was like halftime, and they like doubled them up in score. So these blowouts, you just kind of throw in a big wrench into things, really.
Yeah, it seems like there's I don't know if it's the blowouts, but there's also just been guys who are just playing less minutes this year. I don't know if maybe coaches or franchises are getting smarter about monitoring minutes for guys and not playing them, 40 minutes like the Wizards continue to do. I guess they're the example. They always do that. But, a lot of these guys, like starters are playing 27, 28 minutes this year as opposed to like 35. It just seems weird. And I guess maybe the injury stuff was compounded. It just seems worse because they were guys that were, solid cash game options, that ended up being scratched. So it makes it seem worse as opposed to a guy who is sort of a fringe guy who gets injured.
Yeah, I think a lot of teams are kind of taking it, seeing these successful teams, Spurs popularized by Coach Pop with resting players and just preparing mentally for that playoff stretch. That's what a lot of teams are seeing now. Another thing with the early season is the schedule has been really brutal for some teams, and it hasn't really matched up too well with a team off full rest playing a team, playing their fourth game in 6 nights. So we saw with Dallas that horrible stretch they had. It wasn't too shocking that the rest of those guys, and then now they have 5 days off before their next game. So the schedule has been really rough for a lot of teams. I think that's compounded the minutes problem.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, it's been interesting, something to monitor this year. So, just something to think about for sure. And cash games that, you might just want to be aware of the teams that, have a potential blowout factor and really evaluate whether they're solid cash game play. So on that note, let's get into our game-by-game analysis. So the 2 games that we're going to do today is going to be the Clippers at the Thunder. Obviously a good game here. CP3 against Russ. Chris Paul against Russell Westbrook. I'm not going to use nicknames here. And then the second game is going to be the Kings versus the Blazers. So 2 interesting games. There's a bunch of East Coast games or Eastern Conference games, but a bunch of them have low totals. So we're going to do these 2 Western Conference games, and I think pretty interesting matchups. Let's start with the Clippers Thunder. Seems just like an awesome spot for Chris Paul. What are your thoughts on this game, Justin?
Yeah, I want to start with the Clippers first and their defense. Their defense efficiency so far this season, 89.3, which I went back quite a few years, and that's one of the top marks in the last couple of decades. And usually a defense efficiency around 96, 97 gets you, first atop the team leaderboards for a season. They're at 89.3. So I think this is a comfortable fade for me for the Thunder and cash. I know Russell Westbrook obviously is really tough to fade in general in any circumstance, and he's always popular on FanDuel. He was 11-5 today, but in this spot against this elite Clippers defense against Chris Paul, Russell Westbrook's a tournament only play for me, especially kind of looking at point guard. We'll get into that later. It's really deep. A lot of options today in good spots, so I'm not going to be having any Russell Westbrook in cash today. On the opposite side of the ball, I think Chris Paul, definitely one of the top cash game plays of the slate. He's been kind of burned lately by the blowouts. This Clippers defense has just put the clamps on teams, and they've had some lopsided results, because of that. But you look at CP3 against the Thunder, and just a very, very strong history here. He's averaged 54.2 DK points between this season and last against Thunder, and they played already this season, and he put up 54.3 DK points. So any game where I can project Chris Paul to get anywhere near 30 minutes, 31 minutes, which I think he can get in this spot, I'm all about him. He's just been fantastic to start this year, and I think you want to tie him to Blake Griffin too, who's another really solid option at power forward. So I'm really, really on Chris Paul in this spot. And I want some Blake Griffin too, and I'm going to be limited a little on the OKC side.
Yeah, to put some data to that, the Clippers definitely just been elite on defense, and as opposed to the other side, the Thunder have been pretty good defensively. But we talked last pod about they actually were not that great against point guards. That might have just been because of Westbrook's just crazy offensive burden with his high usage rate, and just maybe taking a break on defense. Not the case for the Clippers. They are just elite against every position. They're holding point guards to 4.4 points below DK expectations. Even worse for power forwards and shooting guards, but it's below, or it's a negative matchup for every position across the board. So definitely a tough matchup here. Jay, what are your thoughts on the Clips? I mean, Western Conference Finals, this seems to be the year. They're playing so good.
Yeah, they look good, but I don't consider them a contender. I think there's still just 3 teams that are contenders. We see the Clips starting 5 just play out of their mind so far. Their net difference in offensive and defense rating is 23.6 among with their starting unit, which is by far not even close to the best in the NBA. I don't anticipate this to really continue. Another thing with the Clips, they're getting 41 points per game from their bench, and they're benching their Achilles heel. In years past, I think that's a kind of skewed number anyways this season with how often the bench has been playing. So, I think they're a good team, and I think you look at the top 3 contenders, and if there's a significant injury, maybe the Clips peak up, get up there a little bit more, but I still am not going to take them too seriously. I think they'll regress a little bit, even though their defense is pretty good, obviously, to start the season. But I'm with you guys. This game is juicy, and I'm excited to watch it as a fan.
Yeah.
But really, you got Chris Paul, who's a lock for cash on both sides. You got Blake, who's very intriguing at the power forward position, which isn't that great, and it's not that top heavy today. So I think you can get away with him. And after that, I'm not really on anybody. I'm with Justin. I'm fading Russ and Cash.
Yeah, I think that has to be the move with just how elite this Clips defense has been. Interestingly, I saw that the Clips bench unit has been really, really good on defense. So is that maybe swayed that maybe they're just improved this year? I mean, you're right. If you're just looking at points per game because they've been playing in blowouts, that might be a little skewed. But defensively, they've been good, which is a little more encouraging for me.
Yeah, they got Wes Johnson, and Doc always talks about Austin being a great on-ball defender a little bit, but they still have Jamal Crawford. They got Felton, they got Mo Buckets. So I'm not really buying that second defense is going to be elite all season.
That's fair. Yeah, I do think Austin's a pretty good on-ball defender. So, Justin, what are your thoughts on DeAndre? We've seen some great play out of Paul and Blake. I think they've been 2 of the maybe top 10, top 12 guys in the league this year. DeAndre has sort of taken a step back as a DFS asset. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, I don't have too much interest in him. I think, if I want to take a flyer on someone in this game as a secondary option, I'm a little intrigued by Steven Adams, even though he kind of dudded his first game against DeAndre. I don't think DeAndre is a very good defender, even though the blocks and the accolades or whatever say otherwise. I want to take another shot in tournaments here at Adams and see what he can do against DeAndre the second time. The first time he disappointed. I think he only went for 2 points and 11 rebounds. So I think in this one, the scoring can pick up any. I think he has a decent shot at a double-double here. So Adams has been generally disappointing as of late, after, a pretty nice start to the season. But, I'm not too on DeAndre, and I don't really see any other secondary options otherwise that I'm liking. Domantas Sabonis has been really nice, but don't really want a reason to test this Clippers defense.
Fair enough. Okay. Before we move on to the next game, and we'll just keep this rolling, Clips are 5-point favorites on the road. Jay, you like them to cover or what?
Oh, man, that's tough.
It's a tough line, yeah.
I mean, the way they're playing and just, the talent level difference, I probably would lean towards the Thunder covering, actually, with that 5.5 at home. We can't leave this game without talking about the biggest enigma in the NBA and Enes Kanter. What are you guys' thoughts on him?
Justin, do you have any thoughts on Kanter?
Yeah, I think he's fine. In these kind of matchups, he's going to play more. He played 23.6 minutes in that first game. So anytime you can put him in for that level of playing time, he's a threat to go for 20 plus points. Plus DK points. So I think he's an interesting tournament option. I'll throw him in with Steven Adams as a guy you can take a look at here. He has shown 35 FanDuel point upside in 2 of his last 3 games. So that's a little intriguing. But like I said, this this Clippers defense is so locked in to start the season that you don't want to get too carried away here in general.
Yeah, I mean, he had that 40.5 DK performance in just 20 minutes against the Heat a couple games ago. So a guy who's not going to get a ton of minutes, even if it is bumped up a little bit, but sort of like Embiid. I don't mean to compare these two, but just a guy who doesn't need minutes is my point. He's just a super high fantasy point per minute scorer. So I guess interesting. I'm less on him because of the matchup, but I guess potentially intriguing. Any last thoughts on this before we move on to the next game?
He shouldn't be in the same sentence with Embiid.
Well, no one should, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to this next game, which is going to be Kings at the Blazers. Kings are obviously playing on a back-to-back here on the road at Portland. So that is definitely interesting. The Portland Trailblazers are 7-point favorites currently, implied to score 108.25 points, which is the third highest mark in Slate. The Kings are down at 101.25. I think this is a really interesting game. We have the Kings on a back-to-back, playing at a sort of a sneaky slow pace this year. They potentially thought they would be a little more up and down, but really, really slow so far this year, which sort of limited, I guess, the floor of some of these guys, even though, some of them have been playing well, Gay and Boogie. But curious your thoughts. Let's start with the Kings side of this. Justin, what are your thoughts on them? RJ, we'll kick to you first.
Yeah, I don't think it's too sneaky surprising with the Kings being that slow in pace. We saw Dave Yeager take this team over. He's consistently at the bottom of the league in pace when he was with Memphis. So they're 29th in pace this season. Yeah, it's something with this Kings team I don't really like too much, and I think we've seen it affect a few players just with their personnel. They're not looking too great playing this slow style of basketball, even though they lack the speed with the front court a little bit. But we've seen Boogie. One thing interesting with him is that he hasn't been his really dominant self. It's not where it was last year where you see Boogie at 9,500 on FanDuel. That's the most auto play you've ever had, and now you actually question yourself, like, okay, is he going to get 43 points or whatever? Is he going to have that ceiling of upper 50s again? And that's something we're missing here a little bit with him, where he's not a shoe-in, and then we have Embiid underpriced as a value play as well there. So center position will be interesting. But, yeah, I think Rudy Gay, this is probably the best basketball he's played in his entire career. I don't exactly know what to attribute that to, but, he's looking great. It's probably pretty likely that he gets traded. But in this spot, I think you look at Aminu sidelined. I think Gay is a nice leverage play, which we'll get into at the small forward position, where it's really actually pretty top heavy. We have a lot of elite plays. I think Gay will probably be overlooked there.
Yeah, with Boogie, it's weird. The rebounding is just so underwhelming this year. You look at his game log, there's a lot of 7 rebound games and there's some 4 rebound games. I think he was at 3 double-digit rebound games this season so far. That's been a real big problem for him, limiting his upside. Used to, if you play him on DK, for example, just an auto for the double-double bonus. So not that case this year. I think the Kings are the worst rebounding team in the league. You have Willie Cauley-Stein, a 7-footer, not playing that many minutes, but he's coming in. I think he's averaging like 3.5 rebounds per 36 this season, which is incredible. And nobody on this team is really rebounding at all, which is just been a big problem why they haven't been winning games. But yeah, I agree. Rudy Gay, pretty much the only guy I'm really interested in, on this team. I think on FanDuel, this is a day where I'm looking at fading Russ and not having a lot of exposure to Boogie, which is not like many other days, because those are the two that you usually kind of start with and look first to, on normal days. So I think this day sets up differently, where there's a lot of value at point guard, especially a lot of value in other spots. And let's get to Portland. And I think that's kind of a really intriguing spot. I know, Bryan, you like Dame Lillard a lot. I think he's a really nice tournament play here. I think there are better cash game spots that we'll look at. Chris Paul, we mentioned. I think Jeff Teague on FanDuel against Philly is really, solid as well. And we can get in some other spots too. But like Dame and TJ McCollum, I think, is a guy that has to be right up there for consideration as one of the top shooting guard plays of the day. He's averaged 42.8 DK points between this season and last against the Kings. And we know the Kings shooting guard position has not been one that's been particularly strong over the years, even though they've gotten a little better with Aaron Aflalo. But CJ McCollum has been really, really boom or bust, but the bust has mostly been foul trouble. So as long as he can stay out of foul trouble in this one, I like his upside. And I think shooting guard's always kind of a weaker spot, on slates without James Harden. So I'll pay up and pay for McCollum just because he offers that ceiling that not a lot of other guys of position today can offer.
Yeah, that's fair. That's a really good stat about the Kings being the worst rebounding team in the league, which is funny considering that their last, I think this is the correct stat, their last 400 draft picks have been centers. I think that's accurate. So funny that they're the worst rebounding team in the league. Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about Dame. I think he's an elite tournament play. I mean, you're right. I think you said it, that CP3, is a little more intriguing going against a Westbrook who is just using so much energy on offense. And, CP3 is a really nice price. And then you're right, the Teague plays or the value guy. So I think Dame is really interesting in tournaments. He's coming off that really bad game against CP3, actually, in which they just got crushed, blown out. He's sort of in a nice bounce back spot. I think he's, probably one of the best tournament plays on DraftKings. He's at 8-7 on DK. Has a 90% bargain rating, leads the slate in pro trends as well. So really elite play there in tournaments. But I guess I'm curious, is there really any, other than the backcourt, are we interested, if the Kings are so bad down low, are we interested in anyone else other than the backcourt for Portland?
No, I'm not really. I think you can have some thin tournament exposure to Plumlee, but my eyes are definitely on the backcourt here with Dame and CJ. And one thing with Dame on DK at that favorable price is that he's kind of elevated his game this year to where he makes for a stronger cash game play. He's been driving to the hoop more. Last season he had 9.8 drives per game. Now he's up to 11.9. His free throw attempts, which coincide with that, are up from 6.2 to 9.7. So that really elevates his floor in cash games, that if his perimeter shot isn't falling, you still have those free throws to count on for Dame to rack up points. And then, like Justin mentioned with CJ, you got to break down his game log and see that 3 of his games were limited minutes. And in games that he's played at least 30 minutes, he's averaged over 40 FanDuel points a game. So I'm looking at this backcourt only. I think with Aminu out, people are going to try to maybe get a little too cute here. We saw Vonleh get 11 rebounds in 26 minutes last start, but he started a lot of games last year and he was very underwhelming.
Interesting. Do you have any theories, Jay, on why Boogie, just going back to him real quick, has been so poor on the glass? I mean, is it potentially because he's been playing a little farther out? I mean, he's shot 9 threes over the past 2 games, shot 6 last game against the Lakers. So, just where it's going, the NBA is sort of stretching him out. He's been playing more power forward since they've been going double big man. So do you think that might be it?
I think with Boogie, he's one of the most interesting players in the league in that he's an elite talent and he's never made the playoffs. And that's really rare, actually, for a lot of players of his caliber to just never make the playoffs. But you look at his career, he's 26 years old and he's had 6 different head coaches. We just mentioned the pace last year. They were actually number 1 in pace last year out of all teams in the league. And now they're 29th. That's just 1 year difference. You can't expect a guy who's still developing, kind of in his prime, 26 years old, to just change an entire offensive system. So with Boogie, it's at that level where I'm actually worried about his growth in these systems that keep changing dramatically.
Yeah, that's a very fair point.
One guy I want to shout out in this game before we move on, I think is kind of have some tournament exposure to, is Mo Harkless. I know people were on him last game a little bit, but obviously the Clippers blew out the Blazers by a wide margin, and he obviously didn't get to play a lot. So I like some Harkless here. I think there are a lot of interesting options at small forward too, where he's not a really, elite tournament option or even a very good one. You have guys like CJ Miles. You have guys like Robert Covington at small forward on FanDuel, who I like too. So I don't mind a little Harkless exposure. I think he's pretty nice in the spot. And his minutes are really secure now without Aminu.
So do you think he'll be above 30 today?
Above 30 minutes? Yeah.
Okay.
Assuming this game stays close. I think he was playing that before Aminu got hurt. They were playing their starters, pretty solid, heavy, consistent minutes. So I like Harkless a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, and that last game was just a blowout blip. So, and those are we're talking about the blowout factor sort of being frustrating, but there's potential for some capitalizing on recency bias. If people see, oh, this guy only got 20 minutes, that's maybe a spot you want to just be a little overweight in tournaments with these guys, just because they might be lower owned than they should be, depending on where their expected minutes should be. So, any last thoughts on this game, Jay, before we move on to positions?
No, I'm good. Let's move
All right,
on.
cool. All right, so let's start point guard. I think we actually sort of went through this one pretty already. So I think the sort of consensus is we love CP3, Chris Paul. Gosh, let me stop using these nicknames. We love Chris Paul for cash games. We love Damian Lillard for tournaments. We like Jeff Teague as sort of the value play going against Philly. Justin, I'll start with you. Where else are you looking other than those guys?
Yeah, I like Marcus Smart a little bit as an option. I think he should be starting. I don't know why over Jaylen Brown. Brad Stevens is putting in Jaylen Brown for like 3 minutes in the first half and then starting Smart in the second half. So I think Marcus Smart, if you look at him, really, really good shot at 32 plus minutes. I have penciled in for 33.7. He's pretty much the fifth starter at this point, even though he's not, even if he doesn't start the game. And, you look at his usage rate lately, and it's been pretty impressive, how many shots he's been taking. Last 2 games, 31 shots in, about 60 minutes or so. So I like Smart a lot, at his price. I think he's my number 4 point guard in my model at the moment on FanDuel at 4,900. So I like that price a lot for him. And I think another guy to mention is I don't know. We'll see where he ends up, but Kyle Lowry could be pretty interesting given how he's been playing in tournaments. I like DeMar DeRozan a lot more now, actually, with the MKG being out news. I think I'm going to be a little bit more heavy on DeRozan now and maybe a little lighter on Lowry, but I still think Lowry is interesting enough to roll out in some tournaments. Other than that, the same kind of suspects. Kyrie Irving is right up there. I think Brandon Jennings has a real nice price on DK at 3,500 if you want to get weird and look at a punt play. Other than, that about does it. Isaiah Thomas has been on a tear lately without Crowder, just playing big minutes and taking a lot of shots. So he's always a consideration on DK. So that's kind of the top level of guys for me.
Yeah, Jay, what are your thoughts? I mean, we mentioned that point guard is pretty deep, and we have a lot of really high-end point guards in the slate. We talked about Westbrook, Wall, if he plays Paul, Lillard, even if going down to Isaiah, Kyrie, Kemba, Lowry, that tier of guys. But some of those guys, other than Paul and Lillard, have sort of sneaky tough matchups. Not super tough, but Kyrie and Wall are going against each other in a game that isn't the highest total in the world. Same with Kemba and Lowry, both pretty good defensive teams. So it seems that Paul and Lillard, I don't know, they're just in a very strong tier of their own for me. So even though there's really strong names in the slate, it just seems like a night to pay up for a point guard, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the value plays here outside of maybe Marcus Smart, who has that minutes upside, are pretty weak. We have Sergio Rodriguez, who's still really cheap. He shot really poorly last game, but his minutes are there. I think he has some upside as a punt play, but it's really not shaping up to be that type of slate where you're going to go him. I think my guy out of all the guys we mentioned at that tier below Dame and CP3, sorry, I'm using nicknames. We've said their names like 20 times. Isaiah, though, is by far my favorite. This is a team that's implied to score the highest amount of points on this slate. He has the 5th highest fantasy points per minute. He's been going off with Crowder out, playing big minutes. He has that per minute base, but he's priced a good chunk lower than everybody above him, the top 4. So you look at Isaiah here, then the Celtics, this game could pop off. So really Isaiah is one of my favorite tournament plays. Celtics have by far the worst defensive rating this season, still without Crowder and Horford, and the Knicks have the 3rd worst defensive rating in the league. So I have my eyes on this game for tournaments pretty heavy.
Isaiah's worst DK total this season, 35.8. I mean, that's a really, really nice floor. I mean, that guy he doesn't bust at all, and he has 50 DK point upside. So he's a guy. Yeah, I like him a lot here at 2 as well. And we'll talk about his backcourt mate Avery Bradley pretty soon. But this usage is concentrated pretty heavily among the three these three guys. You know, Isaiah Thomas, Bradley, and Marcus Smart. So all three in this spot are really nice.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, he's been crazy. He's hit salary-based expectations in every game this year. Hasn't scored below 23 points. But interestingly, he's actually had a lot of assist upside. He has 10 assists in 2 of his last 4 games. So a guy, you know, who's sort of considered just a spark plug scorer for part of his career, but really been aggressive and really been a good ball handler in starting the offense for the Celtics. So had 10 assists last game, 6 rebounds actually against the Wizards. So some upside in his peripheral stats as well. I like that call. Let's move on to shooting guard. Jay, I'll start with you. You know, where are you looking at here?
I think the 3 guys that probably stand out for me is DeMar DeRozan as that top tier guy. Like Justin mentioned, we like him a lot now with Michael Kidd-Gilchrist out. You have a pretty high floor there. He's scoring out of his mind. So I like that if you can pay up. Shooting guard oftentimes this season on Slates without Harden is where you kind of punt and you go these cheap guys. And one cheap guy, value guy, who is the number 1 shooting guard of FanDuel is Rodney Hood. We're like quite a bit. If you look at through his games this season, he's been actually really solid. If you take away the Spurs game, he's averaging over 30 FanDuel points per game in 8 games this season. And then you look at his consistency, it's just been remarkable. His standard deviation this season is 4.3. And to bring that in comparison, you look at Enigma Cantor with a standard deviation of 15, which I imagine is up there with the worst out of anybody. So Rodney Hood's a guy for me that I'm fine on FanDuel at 5,400 in cash. And then I'll let you guys decide. Avery Bradley, 6,900 now on FanDuel. Is he still the chalk?
I don't think he's a chalk. I think he's one of the top options, though. You can parse between Bradley, Hood, DeRozan, and look at those guys. DeRozan, I think I'm going to try to look at, especially on DK. He slayed the OKC Dragon. He slayed Robertson. And that was a matchup that gave him massive trouble, in games past. So to see him come out of that alive, and I think he put up, was it like 50 DK points or something like that in that game, which was, you know, absurd. His mid-range game this season is just off the charts. He's just putting up these ridiculous shots and making everything. So DeRozan, I like a lot. That floor is really, really nice, and I'm gonna try to see if I can fit him in. I think a wild card today, you know, if he plays, maybe is Bradley Beal. This spot against Cleveland isn't great, but you know, as a tournament option, I don't mind a little bit of exposure here. You know, other than that, not really seeing too many other options that kind of stand out. We talked about McCollum already. Monte Ellis, traditionally, I think, is a tournament guy against Philly, but his usage just hasn't been there recently. It's crazy. Just he hasn't been shooting at all. I think he's been I think around like 9 or 10 shots per 36, which is really, really low for him. You see Jeff T, Paul George, those guys really suck up the usage. So not really into Monte. Other than that, any other guys we like kind of as tournament type options here?
I think we kind of nailed them all. CJ was the guy maybe we forgot about just on this segment, but we already talked about him and his upside in the minutes. So, he's a guy I think you throw in there. And, after that, it's kind of like usual, shooting guard. One guy who's interesting in a way is J.R. Smith. He hasn't flashed that ceiling yet. I think if you need to save at shooting guard, you kind of load up at other positions. He's, a relatively fine punt play. I'm playing Washington, who, allows opposing offenses to shoot 38% from 3, which is 3rd worst in the league, and they were fourth worst in the league last season. So he's slightly intriguing. He's got that swag after the new shirtless video that came out again.
That's right.
So some news that just came out: Danny Green is resting today. He's been ruled out. I don't think there's a lot of options there. Really, a lot of plays there with Jonathan Simmons. I'm not really liking him. Not really liking Kyle Anderson too much. Super low usage. Manu Ginobili. Not really liking too much. So I don't think there's too much there with Danny Green out now. A guy I'll shout out to end this on DK at 3,500 is Gerald Henderson. I think he could be a decent tournament play given no Okafor. In these spots, he's really seen his usage really take a spike. And you should see about 25 to 26 minutes in this one. And that team total is still, pretty nice at 104. And you looked at up and down that roster, you got Embiid and Covington. Somebody has to really step up and be that third scorer. And Hendo has really shown some flash that he could be that guy. He's maddening to own because he'll drop like 14 points in the first quarter and score like 4 points the rest of the game. But I think he's okay at his price on DK.
That's fair. To go back to your question, Jay, Avery Bradley, is he too expensive? I don't think so. I think he's a 7K guy as far as his play, and he's, you're getting him just a little bit below that. If you look at our models right now, he has a pretty high projected plus minus. So, a guy that I think is definitely still viable in cash. The Knicks have been the 8th worst team against shooting guards this year. One guy that I think is going to be pretty popular because of the MKG news is Batum. He's projected for the highest ownership at 13 to 16% on FanDuel. But he just hasn't really flashed his ceiling this year. He's been okay, but he hasn't had the triple-double upside that we saw, even just last year at times and a couple years ago as well. So, yeah, I think we hit all the shooting guards. It's sort of top heavy on this side as well with DeRozan and Bradley. Hood is sort of the value guy. So, cool. Let's move on to small forward. We obviously have LeBron in this slate. We have Carmelo. We have Rudy Gay on a back-to-back, but some really big names, Paul George and Kawhi with some interesting matchups. Paul George going against Philly, obviously. Jay, well, I'll start with you. Where are you looking at for small forward here?
I really like this small forward top tier. We've seen a lot of slates this season where it's been really difficult to pick a small forward, especially when elite talent isn't really available. And we've had Melo start off really sluggish, but I think you start with Melo on these slates. He's clearly underpriced for his play as of late. He's kind of stringing together some strong games. He's facing a Boston defense without Jay Crowder, has given up an average of 123 points per game in their last 3 games. So you look at Melo, 7,500 or 7,700 on FanDuel, 7,400 on DK. That's kind of where I'm starting with my small forward. And then after that, you kind of take your choice. You have LeBron, who you're paying for a high floor. His lowest performance this season is 40 points. He averaged 52 DraftKings points against them last year in 3 games. We got Paul George, just 8,100 on DK playing Philly. We have Kawhi, who I think will be overlooked today. I think he's a sneaky tournament play. For Kawhi, it's all about minutes in games. He's seen over 30 minutes. He's averaged 51.75 DK points this season. So I think he's a guy you assume with this tighter spread for them that's going to go over 30 minutes, and I like him a lot. So I think you start at that elite tier, and then you can kind of get into cheaper guys, maybe overlooked guys, even such as, we talked about Rudy Gay. Another leverage play I think here is Gordon Hayward, who's taken at least 17 shots in each of his 3 games since returning from injury. So you've got a lot of guys like that. I don't like too many cheap guys as far as trusting them in cash and then even upside in tournaments. I think a guy who's still playing well for his price is CJ Miles, but I just don't love the upside there when you have some of these other small forwards that have pretty massive ceilings.
Yeah, Justin, what are your thoughts on this small forward position? And I'm really curious about your thoughts specifically on LeBron. If we look at his matchup against the Wizards, the Wizards haven't played a small forward really that's any good this year. If we look at the most expensive FanDuel small forwards that they've played, it's been Aaron Gordon, Kent Bazemore, and Trevor Ariza. Those are the 3 best small forwards they've played this year. So obviously get a tougher matchup. Otto Porter against LeBron. So I'm curious your thought on him. He's expensive. Melo is much cheaper, but seems to be in a really nice spot here.
Yeah, I don't mind LeBron on FanDuel at all at 9,100. I don't think he's going to be my cash lineups, but I think he's a really strong tournament play. He's done really well in this matchup in the past. Averaged 53.2 DK points in 3 meetings against the Wizards last season. So 100% consistency on those, plus 7.5 points below above salary-based expectation. But I agree that, it starts with Melo here for me. He had a horrific first half against the Nets the other night and still salvaged it and finished with 37.4 FanDuel points. So in this spot against the Celtics defense that's been hemorrhaging points, without Jay Crowder, I think he's the guy you want to lock in. And I think it really comes down to roster construction for the other guys. I think my approach for small forwards is going to probably be, lock Carmelo in, lock those top tier point guards in, fill in the other spots, and then see what I land, what I'm left with at small forward. Because there's a host of guys here that I'm fine with. One guy we haven't even mentioned yet, I think, is Otto Porter, who's just been on absolute tear as of late. He's dwarfed Markieff Morris in production, and we have Bradley Beal, who's gimpy with a hamstring injury. So Otto Porter here, I don't mind at all. Even at 6K, I think if you land, you end up with 6K on your roster, I don't mind him either. So a lot of options here that I'm okay with. Bob Covington, Gordon Hayward, Paul George, LeBron, Rudy Gay, Porter. It just kind of depends on where my roster construction leads me to.
Jay, what are your thoughts on Hayward? I mean, this is a guy who returned from injury 2 games ago, and I don't know what other people thought, but usually when a guy returns from an injury and it's sort of just playing his first game of the year, you're just sort of skeptical of whether there's going to be rust. But that has not been the case at all. He's played 36 minutes last game, has been crushing. George Hill's questionable tonight. What are your thoughts on him? And we can sort of quickly touch on Rodney Hood. If George Hill ends up being out tonight, what are your thoughts on the Jazz sort of wing position?
So quick note to add on that, George Hill missed shoot around. I think he's still questionable, but he's probably closer to doubtful, I'd say, for this game.
Okay.
Go for it, Jay.
Yeah, wings for Utah.
Yeah, I touched up on Hayward, averaging 17 shots a game. I like him a lot as a tournament play. I think you look at Shelvin Mack, who'd be running the point without George Hill. It's clearly a lower usage rate. They'll delegate more. Hayward is a great playmaker. He's kind of the Chandler Parsons type. He can control the ball. He can create his own shot. He has a lot of upside here. High volume. And then I mentioned Rodney Hood earlier, who I think is going to be a pretty chalky play actually tonight on FanDuel. He's got that high floor. So I think you get this combo a lot in tournaments and hope for a shootout in that game. But I think Hayward's right up there with some of these other small forwards in terms of you're going to get low ownership and he still flashes that ceiling.
Yeah, definitely fair. So just looking through our trends tool, the worst team or the second worst team in the NBA against small forwards this year has been the Celtics. So just another great bump up for Melo in this spot. I think easy cash option. Last thoughts on this position. I mean, we didn't even hit on really PG or Kawhi. At sort of the upper range in between Melo and LeBron might see some lower ownership just because of just their weird pricing. I don't know. PG's going against Philly, so I'm not sure if we really have low ownership.
I want to talk about one thing. I don't know if this is overthinking it, and it probably won't really influence my decisions, especially on Teague. But something that worries me a little bit about Teague is the massive home and away splits for the Pacers and Teague this season. So the Pacers on the road this season are 0-4, and they've gotten beat by an average of 16.5 points. They're just getting killed on the road. And you look at Jeff Teague. I'm going to pull up his splits right now, his home and away splits. I think he's shooting, let me see, he's shooting 47% at home, and that goes to 23% on the road. So are we worried at all about this kind of these early away, on the road struggles for the Pacers, or is this kind of just small sample size noise? We have the matchup against Philly, obviously, which is nice. But is this something to at least be concerned about a little bit here?
I mean, no, not. I wouldn't put that much stock in such a small sample size. I might be a little more concerned if they weren't playing Philly, but I think that sort of overrules the split. So I don't know. Maybe it's just something where I think it's definitely safe, especially at Teague's price, to go him in cash. I don't know. I mean, he's playing against Sergio and I mean, like, yeah, I'm not too terribly worried about the splits considering the matchup. But if it was a different matchup, then that might be something where I at least think about moving off of him in cash. What are your thoughts, Jay?
Yeah, I think it's a small sample size. I'm worried about their defense just in general, the Pacers. It's been horrendous. So that's what I worry about more. I think it's fair, if it keeps continuing, it's something to be alarmed of. But I think you might offset it a little bit with the positive matchup and then the fear there is with the home away. I think, you don't have to go crazy and go both team and Paul George on your cash team if that's the way you want to do it. Kind of escape that downside a little bit. Go one or the other, depending on price. Teague on FanDuel, Paul George on DK, for example.
Cool. I guess what I'm saying is bet Sixers for plus 4.5.
All right, fair enough. All right, let's move to power forward position. We'll keep on moving through. Finish with center. So Justin, I'll start with you. Seems like Favors, man. He's the guy. He played 34, 35 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
It's looked really good with Hayward back on the court. Looks a little bit healthier. And for some reason, he's 5'9" on FanDuel. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I think you don't have to overthink this. He's looked fantastic. Bryan posted that on-off shot on his Twitter about Favors being the biggest beneficiary from George Hill's absence was what you used what you queried using our on-off tool. And yeah, 5,900 is a joke. With obviously his minutes restriction is gone. Haven't projected for 32 minutes today. I don't think this is a particularly imposing matchup. Obviously you have the remnants of Serge Ibaka, but I think he can still win in this spot. At that price, it doesn't worry me too much. The other options, I like Porzingis quite a bit. I'm going to go back to him. I like the fact a lot that Hornacek is staggering the minutes of Melo and Porzingis now. He did that last game, and that means higher usage for both of those guys. And I love that. Porzingis, anchoring his unit and Melo anchoring his. So for those two, it really solidifies their floor. And we obviously mentioned this really leaky Celtics defense without Jay Crowder. So I like Porzingis quite a bit today. We got to talk about Kevin Love, who's been doing really well as of late. He's been really solid. I like him at his price, $7,500 on FanDuel. And then we got to talk about Frank the Tank.
Frank the Tank. I knew that was coming.
I'm trying, guys. I'm trying to push these white big men from the Hornets down, but it won't let me. We got MKG out today, and I think it's going to be one of two things. We're going to see Marvin Williams start at the 3, Frank Kaminsky start at the 4, or we're going to see Travion Graham. I think he's a rookie out of VCU. Get the spot start at small forward. That was what Rick Bonnell speculated, but I was reading the newsfeed and apparently Marco Bellinelli is listed right now as a starter.
Wow.
So we'll have to see on that. So if Marco Bellinelli gets to start instead, I think he's in the mix as a punt option, though I think that's a little trappy. I think that's a little trappy because his usage will come down, in that starting unit.
And he's terrible.
Well, I'll defer to you on that one. I don't think he's that great either. And I think it definitely takes Frank Kaminsky down from, kind of in the mix as a cash game punt play to more of like a fringier option. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. Bonnell didn't think Bellinelli will start at all. So maybe that's just a case where they're listing something and going to go with something else. Yeah,
as sad as this may be, I'm off Frank. I get it. That if he gets the starter, he's going to be expected to play a ton of minutes. I get it. He's 4K on FanDuel, but he played 2 games ago against the Pacers. Played 30 minutes. The Pacers have been one of the best matchups for power forwards, really for a lot of positions. We talked just a second ago how awful they've been, and he scored 14 FanDuel points. I mean, the guy just has such a low floor even at his price. And with how cheap these other guys are that we talked about, I mean, I really love Kristaps as well today. And Favors is sort of the guy that, he could just be your first guy in your cash game lineup. I don't think you need to go down to Frank. There's just sort of an unsafe floor. I think that you can, get away with these mid-tier options with Favors and Porzingis. Jay, what are your thoughts on this position?
Yeah, I think on FanDuel especially, they kind of gifted us with favors. One of the biggest edges in DFS is, reading these pricing inefficiencies. That's one of the biggest advantages you can have. And here's one that just fell in your lap. So you don't want to overthink favors. I'm with you guys. I love Porzingis a lot. I think 6,900 is very manageable on this slate. You look at Kaminsky. If he draws a start, he averaged 21 FanDuel points per game in his 3 starts last season. He's a guy, like you just said, I don't think you need to go on this slate. You don't need to risk that floor. Although Porzingis, I still have in the back of my head when I rostered him when he didn't make a field goal, so that's always going to be there for me. But those are the 2 guys I'm looking at a lot. I think Marvin's a little bit interesting, playing a lot of minutes there at 5K on FanDuel. We mentioned Cantor a little bit for tournaments. The guy, I guess Kevin Love, we can talk about, he really struggled in this matchup last year, so I'm less hesitant to kind of roll him out, especially with you got 2 cheaper guys who I probably like more, even at a raw value than Love, that I'm fine rostering. But I think the tournament play here we talked about earlier in this pod is Blake, and that's kind of the guy I think when you look at all this value here, people are going to overlook Blake a little bit, and he's the guy. I like that double-double upside. Portland gives up the 3rd most rebounds per game, so I think that ceiling is there for Blake tonight.
That's fair. Justin, a guy, this is getting sort of fringy as well, but, just similar price point as Frank, but I actually like him a little bit more. I'll admit it.
Oh, I think we're the same guy.
Saric?
Yeah, Saric, yeah. So Saric I think is really intriguing in tournaments just because we know that Okafor is probably not going to play. Rashawn Holmes is going to get some run there, but Saric, 33.9 FanDuel points in his last game, and in the games where he's seen at least 28 minutes, we're seeing FanDuel totals of 24.9, 25.1, and 33.9. So Ilyasova was in there a little bit, kind of as nipping at his heels, but he's separated himself from Ilya, especially last game. So Saric is a guy that's interesting. I think he's more the guy that I'm looking at if I'm going cheap than Kaminsky, just because I think he offers a pretty nice floor at his price, and he gives you the ceiling that Frank isn't going to reach either. So Saric, I think Saric is 4,100, and I'd probably go Saric at 41 over Kaminsky at 4, especially if Kaminsky is not going to start.
Bryan, what do you think Frank's ceiling actually is?
Like in terms of like FanDuel points?
Just life, career, anything. Yeah, FanDuel points, sure.
So he's actually a pretty like funny dude. Like if you follow him on social media, like he's got personality. Some people do not like it.
I'm judging you so hard for following him on Twitter.
Man, that's rough.
Yeah.
All right, I'm sorry I opened that can. One guy I want to bring up on DraftKings, and this is something DraftKings has done a lot in NFL and NBA, is dynamic pricing. We see Aaron Gordon at a very low price over there based on matchup. We saw them do this with Chris Paul and Blake Griffin against the Spurs. Now we're seeing Gordon drop to by far his lowest price point of the season. We see Tobias Harris is another guy today playing the Spurs at his season low salary. Is there any value there with Gordon, who I think is capable of paying off that price pretty easily?
I'll go. I mean, it's fine. It's just, it's sort of that price is awkward, like I don't know, like is his ceiling that much higher than Saric's?
I think it's stability. I mean, for cash games, I'd much rather go Gordon, I think, than Saric.
Yeah, but like if at that point, I might as well I'm just thinking about paying up for some of these mid-price guys. Like I don't think his floor is that safe, to be honest.
No, I think it's a fair point. I think I'd rather. 4,900 is way too cheap. It's fair. I think you're gonna get maybe a profit. If he does do pretty well here of, +5 of, projected plus minus, which is really solid. But, does it, I mean, it would, I think the value it adds is if you can fit hit, if you can come down on him and you can afford someone else as a result. I think that's kind of the intrigue of him to me. If paying down for him gives you someone else, but he's not a guy I'm going out of my way to target just because I don't think he has a really high ceiling in this spot. I think the pace, the total of 94, the blowout potential possibly here, where Orlando's very, hot and cold as a team in general. You look at their game log, they, blowouts galore. So Gordon, yeah, I don't know. I see it, but I don't think I'm gonna go. I don't think I'm gonna go in the tournaments.
Yeah, I agree. I just bringing it up as an interesting kind of salary price point. But yeah, I'm not gonna have too much. I think, like you said, if you get that team that you could just really load up on those studs and save there, then I don't mind that in a tournament.
I will say about Frank the Tank, in the preseason, he was in Chicago. So he's from Chicago.
Bryan.
Oh, no, he was from Chicago. He was there in the preseason. This is when the Cubs were in the playoffs, obviously. He made a custom Bartman jersey and wore it to the games.
I know, I saw that.
Yeah, I saw it too. Yeah, who cares?
I mean, I agree. I'm just all right, let's finish with center, which is really tough. We have Boogie on this back-to-back. He's rating really highly in models. A lot of that is just because of the matchup against the Blazers. They have an awful opponent plus-minus plus 3.89 on FanDuel. He leads all centers with 16 pro trends, which is just massive. But, we've talked about our concerns with Boogie with the slow pace at 9.5 on a back-to-back. I don't know. Justin, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, like I said, I don't think it's a must, especially at his price point. There are other studs here that I feel a lot more confident about. I think Boogie, have him for like 45, 44 FanDuel points, which is kind of what he's been doing the last two games. I just don't see that upside in him today in this spot that I do with other players. I think a guy who's really solid, is Marcin Gortat. Been playing really big minutes as of late. We know this Cavs matchup isn't traditionally favorable for big men, but for 4 games against the Cavs last season, he averaged 30.9 DK points, which is slightly above salary-based expectations. So he's shown before that he can do well in this spot here. And other side of the ball on that same game, Tristan Thompson, I don't mind either on FanDuel. I think he's 4,500 at his price. In this matchup, they'll have to play him quite a bit to match up against Gortat. I think that duo in that game is kind of where I'm looking at for kind of my value there at center to come down from Boogie. Obviously we know Embiid is going to be right up there with one of the top cash game plays anytime he suits up. He's still 5,200 on FanDuel. I love him a lot. I think a guy that's kind of off the wall a little bit is Al Jefferson. He's 3,700 on DK, and that's you look at his game log and the usage he's been putting up with that second unit. And against Philly, last game against Philly, which was on Wednesday, he put up 29 DK points off the bench. So at 3,700, that's pretty nice for me. I don't think I'm going to cash him, but he's just kind of intriguing at that price point.
Yeah, Jay, what are your thoughts there? And do you like any of these, some of these upper guys? I guess by upper guys, I mean Drummond.
Yeah, I was just going to say Drummond, actually. I think you look at the slate, and it's kind of rare at this point to get Andre Drummond at severely low ownership, and I think this slate kind of works out like that, where you're going to see incredibly low ownership on Drummond. On FanDuel for cash, I'm sticking with Embiid, 5,200. Pacers have not been good against opposing centers this season. One thing with Embiid that you kind of need at this point is his blocks, because his turnover rate is pretty obscene to start the season. So I look at Embiid on FanDuel pretty hard, and I think on DK, it's a bit tougher. I agree that Gortat is a great leverage play here. He's underpriced on both sites. He's pretty high in the models on both sites, but I still don't think his ownership will be too high. So I think you're really getting value out of him in tournaments, especially on DK with that double-double bonus. So I'm not looking at too many guys here. I think Miles Turner has flashed that upside. I'm slightly intrigued by him. Plumlee, you're going to get low ownership coming off a game where he was 1 for 12 shooting. But I'd say Drummond is probably my guy at that top price to kind of leverage off of. With Boogie, I think there is some concern with that second leg of a back-to-back away. He's averaged in his career, or in the last 3 years, 6.5 points less on those road back-to-back. So there is concern there. And I think I think the projection's perfect where he's at. So I think on FanDuel, you're going to have to make a choice. he's still the number one center. He's still value, but I'm probably more likely to save there with Embiid and pay up elsewhere.
One thing that we haven't talked about a ton, but we'll shit on real quick before we finish. DraftKings has their multi-position eligibility this year. With center not that great, it's in this spot in the slate today. Are you okay with maybe some Kevin Love in the center spot, since he has power forward center eligibility and use 2 power forwards? As weird as that may sound this year, Justin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine on Love. I understand, Jay, what he said earlier about the spot and him struggling in the past. But, I mean, you look at him, he's been pretty darn consistent. He had one dud against the Magic, I think, where he put up 25.3 DK points. But other than that, he's been really solid as of late. And I've been playing really, big minutes. I have him projected for 33.5, and I think that's a little conservative, honestly, assuming this game stays close. So aside from that Orlando game, 34 plus FanDuel points in every other game. So I think he's fine to kind of just to kind of pay there to get some semblance of a floor. Though I don't think it's the best use of your kind of points per dollar necessarily. Yeah. I think getting a guy who I feel is pretty safe. Is worth something to me, at least.
That's fair. Okay. All right. Any last thoughts, or do we want to end it here? I think that's
I think center on DK is going to be really tough, and that's kind of going to be the spot where you're going to make or break your lineup.
Yeah, maybe some Jefferson in tournaments. 3-9 is really nice in that second unit. So
absolutely.
Aaron Gordon or Saric, more DK points?
Oh,
I got Aaron Gordon.
All right, I got Saric. We'll keep that as our one skill game proposition if we're pulling from the NFL pod. So, all right, we will end it there. Thanks everyone for listening. As always, we hope you guys have really great nights. Definitely give us feedback as much as you want at FantasyLabs NBA. Our personal Twitters, I'm at Bryan_Mears. Jay is at Doppel Sykes with a Y. Justin's at JFaned. So definitely shout us with any questions, any feedback. Good luck tonight. We'll talk to you guys next week.
Thanks, guys.
Good luck, guys.